السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Peace be upon you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of God,
البداية
in the
مرحبا بكم
beginning,
جميعاً.
welcome all.
أود في البداية أن أعبر
I would like in the
عن
beginning
مدى
to
سعادتي
express
بهذا
how
اللقاء.
glad I am in
الذي
this
أرجو
meeting,
أن
which
يسهم
I
في فهم أكثر
hope
عمقاً
that it will contribute to a better understanding and recognition of the crisis and the war in Yemen. It is very important to meet every now and again, to speak and share ideas
تدور بيننا.
that circulate around us, the different ideas about issues that we are mutually concerned about. This will help us see things in realistically, and we will be more capable to have a vision for the future. Dear colleagues, the more I try to think of a vision for a forward vision or a look for the reality of Yemen after the war, it seems that we need to understand that putting an end to the war is strongly interlinked with having a vision for the post-war Yemen. It is very important to define the end of the war and what are the conditions that when met we can say that the war has ended in Yemen. We need to start after that with the challenges of the day after the end of the war. These challenges are clear, and it's very important to identify them in order not to be surprised by those who messed with Yemen and usurped it in the past wars of the year in agreements that are camouflaged in peace talks to satisfy the foreign powers competing in Yemen and their tools to complete their agendas through these talks or these settlements after the war, and to divide Yemen and to create the statelets that are based on the militia forces. The Houthi militia, which started the war and made a coup against the state, the war in their mind will only end when they impose their control by the force of weapons and to have their own state and controlling the community and controlling all the resources and the institutions of the state, including educational institutions and life in general in Yemen. It is a movement that doesn't show any flexibility to accept any kind of political settlement in which it will be one of the components of the community and one political party that represents a part of the community. For Saudi Arabia, war will be ended if its management of the war in Yemen were reflected in partial agreements that serve its interests in a state that is nothing like a state. And in terms of the impact or the influence of the war in Yemen on its national security and to putting an end to the threats that come from Yemen to Saudi Arabia, as it claims, as well as controlling the wealth that Yemen has and the strategic geopolitical position that it has. And this will lead to that Yemen will remain in division and internal conflicts in Yemen. For the United Arab Emirates, the war will be ended for it if it supported the militias that are fighting in Yemen and that now are having their own zones of influence through partial agreements that they reached together. All of these so-called ends of wars will not put an end to the war, but actually will add fuel to the fire and will increase the suffering of Yemen. The war can never end in deals struck by the warlords inside Syria with the support of their foreign backers.
الحريصة على مصالحها
the backers who are interested or keen on their interest, and they don't want to have Yemen after the war one unified independent state that has the capabilities for stability and peace. The war can never end by forcing the legitimacy of the warlords to be recognized as partners who will abuse this recognition for their own networks of interests that they have built at the cost of their people and the country and the blood of the Yemenis and their suffering. Any end of the war will be an end if the country has been divided into small parts ruled by militias supported by Yemenis, by the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. What kind of end of war will that be? If we will have chaos in the country, and it will end the republic and the unity and the outputs of the national dialogue, and revoke the constitution and the federal state and regions in the country. What kind of an end of war is that if it will lead the Republic of Yemen and the national unified entity of Yemen and the personality of our state that is internationally recognized is lost? These questions are not a prestige or just a kind of luxury that we are doing. The remaining of the custody or the control of other powers means a continuation of the war, the continuation of interest of other countries in our country. It means that the war continues. The war will end by bringing Yemen back together, not by dividing it. The war will end when the Republic of Yemen, that is completely sovereign and that has full control over all the territories from Saada to Al-Mahra, and from Sana'a to Sayoun, and from Socotra to Aden, and from Bab al-Mandeb, and every corner of the Yemeni territories is under the Yemeni authority. The three terms of reference are not cards that can be overlooked, and the implementation order to strike peace settlements outside these terms of reference. They are parameters for coups, and they prevent the state to come back. The terms of reference represent the Yemeni people, and it is a guarantee for them to get back to peace. Our discussion today will revolve around this, with a forward-looking vision to the post-war Yemen, based on our understanding of the realities on the ground and the complexities that we have, and what that requires from us to do in order to overcome all of these obstacles to prevail at the end of the day. Dear colleagues, as you all may know, Yemen was about to make a referendum on the new constitution and to hold presidential elections and parliamentary elections based in accordance with the new constitution. It was a matter that will lead the democratic transition in Yemen forward, and it would have given the Yemeni process more factors for development, improvement, and positive work, because we know our country well. And usually when there is a fight or a conflict on authority or on power, it reflects badly on the people. So we want to fight for a pluralistic country that respects the rights of their citizens and prevents violence and oppression against people. We can summarize what has been happening in Yemen briefly. In the beginning, there was a quartet alliance against the revolution. It included the Houthis, the Ali Abdullah Saleh, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. This alliance aimed to destroy the outputs of the February revolution. Then there was an alliance between Ali Abdullah Saleh and his party and the Houthis, who took over Sana'a, and that it was okay to move forward after Sana'a, given that these forces do not reach Aden. Later, the local partner, who are the Houthis and the Saleh, they crossed the red line that the leadership of the counter-revolution in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates has put for them, and this alliance were under the control of these two countries, and the agenda of this alliance was put by these powers, and it was not announced, of course. The announcement was, of course, to support the legitimate governance and bringing it back based on the three terms of reference. But what was not announced, or which was not declared, the real aim of this alliance between Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates is making rebellions and coups in every governorate in Yemen, and to empower those militias who are funded and administered solely by the Arab coalition. Unfortunately, a lot of people or groups were satisfied to be tools for this coalition, to be tools, to be followers, not leaders. And because of of course, within this context, some slogans are being declared, like the entry to Sana'a and toppling the coup and bringing back or gaining back the institutions of the state, without any real solutions to amend this problem between the state of Yemen and the Arab coalition. So we need to put an end to this messing up that affects our current reality and the future. The liberation of Sana'a starts with the liberation of our national decision, and the toppling the coup of the Houthis start with the liberation from the Saudi and Emirati control and influence over our country. Actually, it will be. We won't be able to gain back our country and our state if we are completely under the authority and control of United Arab Emirates. The UAE and Saudi Arabia deformed the war against the Houthis, and it is no secret if I say that the militias and the forces created by the Arab coalition have enmity against each other that is more than the enmity they have against the Houthis. They prefer to have the Houthi controlling Sana'a rather than being liberated by the forces of the National Army, which are stereotyped and labeled as the forces of Al-Islah Party. What happened is that Sana'a has fallen, and it was supported to be fallen for several interests, under the pretext that they are defending it from the forces of Al-Islah Party. Of course, here I'm not defending Al-Islah Party, because it is also, since the beginning of the war of the coalition, it doesn't have or doesn't own its own decision, and it is working under the Saudis with the transitional council and the elite forces and Al-Tariq forces and the different small militias that are being controlled by the occupying forces anytime and anywhere they want, and they move by the whims and the orders of the occupiers. On the other hand, it doesn't seem that the Houthi militias are any different of those groups that are completely controlled by the Saudis and the Emiratis, because they are playing their role in this war, which targets Yemen as a state which is a state that is trying to be a democratic state in the world. You can see how the Houthis stopped their war with Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates by having a new invasions inside Yemen on front lines that were frozen. This doesn't show, or it shows that there are some kind of settlements with the occupiers, the same way they had the settlement with the Houthis in the fall of Sana'a, and it shows that the reconciliation and the national dialogue, they are lies, and they are just to win time and as red heading. As you all know, Yemen has its different wars on different levels, as well as the growing humanitarian crisis, which made international organizations to describe what happens in Yemen as a catastrophe that is growing bigger and bigger by time. The parties that contributed to increasing the Yemeni crisis, some people try to cover what is really happening in there. For example, they think that not naming the killers is something that is possible, and I assure you that this is something that can never be possible. So the Yemeni issue needs to have the necessary recognition and spotlight. It is not acceptable to keep silence on the abuses and violations that are happening against the state, against the people and citizens who are victims of militias that are fighting, outlaw militias that are fighting on the Yemeni territories. Dear colleagues, in all of this war that is destroying life in our country, there is insistence on reproducing the mistakes again and again. Those who have the political decision and the control over the country, they must be held accountable for what is happening in the country. It is a pity that the Yemeni legitimacy is dealing with all of these backwardness as if it is something that is not one of its responsibilities. It is a shame indeed. Let me say here that the legitimacy became a tool that legitimized the occupation of the foreign power. Yes, it is a tool that legitimizes the occupation of the country. Occupation is not a check written without a number. The legitimacy is under the control and influence of the occupiers. The legitimate governance must have its own responsibility to work. So those who look at the foreign and internal occupation, and they deal with them together and deal in the and who fight all of that, they are the only legitimacy that Yemen needs, and they are the only ones that must be legitimate in the country. There is a vacuum in the authority. The decisions that are written by the Saudi ambassador and signed by Hadi and his government, they don't represent us or represent any legitimate governance in Yemen. Hadi, in the best scenario, he is incapable of doing anything, which means that he lost his status and his decisions are not binding for Syrians as long as he is constrained and incapable of saying no to the Saudi ambassador rather than anybody who is higher than him. There is no justification for this political incapacity. It means the people inside Yemen the forces that are fighting in Yemen should declare a new legitimate power, national power that fights Hadi and the occupiers and represent the sovereignty of the the Yemeni people and the independence of the Yemen people. This is a call for them to start with this. If they do so, our people will gather around them and we will be recognized in the world and the world will deal with us. This field leadership must not receive any directions or directives coming up from Riyadh, even if they are camouflaged with the signature or the call of Hadi. And they must not obey them anymore. They must have their complete independent decision from Saudi Arabia and the coalition. When they do so, they will be legitimate. These are responsibilities that cannot be undertaken by people who are sitting in Riyadh and receiving their orders from Saudi Arabia. Everything that is happening them is destroying and weakening the Yemeni legitimacy and sovereignty and making us weak in conducting our own imperatives. Dear colleagues, this is not a call for despair or anything like that, because the victories the coalition, the Arab coalition, is achieving in Yemen are fake gains, because the major war of Yemenis is to restore our country from the criminals. This will take place one day, and this occupation will end one day. It is the fight of the Yemeni generations that we will undertake, each one of us from his own position, from his own place. The first step should start with recognizing that both occupations, the internal and the external occupation, have one goal, which means they are enemies of our people and the freedom and of our people and the state of citizenship. And the same applies to them when they are in agreement or in disagreement. This is the fight, our major fight that we will undertake in order to achieve our goals and achieve our state that is based on the rule of law, citizenship, and scientific advancements, and the importance of work. Over the past years, there has been a lot of speaking about peace, but very little work in that regard. However, the dominant characteristic in this field was the lack of the factors for peace. There was there was confusion between stopping the war and building peace. Of course, stopping war is only one step to build genuine and sustainable peace. Maybe every now and then you read when people talk about peace in Yemen, about the end of the war and guarantees that Saudi Arabia asks for any peace deal to end the war in Yemen. Saudi Arabia asks for the security of its borders and not to launch any rockets from Yemen to the Saudi territories. Of course, these demands has nothing to do with the reality. Saudi Arabia administered the war by putting Yemen under its control, a divided, fragmented Yemen that it is controlling the parts as it controls any herd. We ask for guarantees from Saudi Arabia to stop its influence over Yemen and commitment to build what it had destroyed in a war that it was party to. But the Saudi borders can never or the security of Saudi Arabia can never be achieved through bilateral agreements between Saudi Arabia and the Houthi groups, or between Saudi Arabia and the militia of the Transitional Council, or any other militia groups that are non-state groups. Saudi Arabia can never control its borders and its security unless it strikes deals with the Yemeni state, which enjoys full sovereignty. This is the only way the Saudi Arabia can control its security. Borders are not a security barrier. It is rather an agreement between two countries. The borders has to do with the Yemeni workforce who are working in Saudi Arabia and who are affected because of the war. Borders are not from one side, and they cannot be protected by overwhelming Yemen in chaos and stealing its security and sovereignty. Borders cannot be protected through deals that are struck with warlords and agreements that are not bound by the international law. The borders can be protected through agreements between two sovereign states, the state of Saudi Arabia and the state of the Republic of Yemen. And they should be based on a mutual recognition of each country in security, stability, mutual interests, and the good neighboring relations that are built on protecting the interests of each country and each people, not the interests of one side at the cost of the other. The borders between Saudi Arabia and is between the state of Saudi Arabia and the Republic of Yemen, and not between Saudi Arabia and the vacuum in Yemen. It is a border between two states, not between Saudi Arabia and the Transitional Council or the Houthi groups. The borders are there to organize the relations and cooperation and the shared interests, and doesn't allow Saudi Arabia to usurp Yemen under the pretext of protecting Saudi Arabia. Talking about the security of the Saudi Arabia from one part of the side is a stark indicator that Saudi Arabia doesn't want and is not willing to see Yemen as a party that has its own independent entity and its own interests under the pretext of protecting its security and borders. Saudi Arabia used Yemen as an open space for war, for continuing war. The return of the Yemeni state we have seen in the past 5 years that this is something that Saudi Arabia doesn't think of. So to understand a post-war Yemen, we need to know, we need to have in the first priority to have one sovereign, independent, united Yemen that represents the legitimacy of the Yemeni state and its legal character or legal personality. But the continuation of the de facto forces in Sana'a and Aden, and the continuation of the foreign control of Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, no matter what shape they take, it means that the war will continue, and it will make Yemen fragmented and continue as such. Any end of the war and the building peace right now that doesn't go beyond the small militias, it means that it will perpetuate war and not end war. Nevertheless, we need to focus on that and reiterate that over and over again, because what is being prepared for Yemen and what is being cooked on behind the closed door is something different. So we need to reiterate that over and over again, and we are looking for peace and the end of the war, and to see what do we need to do in the day after and to get back to the state and the social relations that have been severed by the war. 5 years of war and hostilities and sectarian tensions led us here, and it affected all parts, all aspects of the of life. The partial agreements are perpetuating the war, and it is putting the basic Yemeni issue aside and making Yemen more victimized and people more suffering. There is only one thing that we can do apart from surrendering to the Houthi militias and the foreign occupiers. We can summarize this condition by the resumption of the political process from where it is stopped. This process must include disarming all militias and parties, so the Yemeni state can be the exclusive or rightful owner of weapons and the only one with the exclusive power to use weapons. And then we can continue with the constitution and holding the different elections based on the new constitution. These are the steps that stopped because of the coup and the war. There are a lot of details that can be researched under this condition, which is considered the core of legitimacy, and it summarizes all the items that are issued in different international resolutions. Apart from that, all other efforts are only efforts to control Yemenis under the de facto forces that are controlled by the Houthis and the Saudis and the Emirati occupation. Anybody who calls for that track, it doesn't mean that they are calling for peace or doing a favor for the Yemenis. They are rather making or sowing the seeds of an non-ending wars and conflicts. We are in the 5th year of a war that we don't see any end of it in the horizon. Nevertheless, I trust the ability of our people who will not accept to be enslaved by the Houthis or by the foreign powers or occupiers. Yemen cannot be enslaved and cannot be divided, and will never be under the control and influence of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These are the facts of history, and we will repeat these facts with our resolved ability and our commitment and affiliation to Yemen, as well as our sacrifices for it. A democratic Republican Yemen for which our founding fathers fought and reached this country, and for which our people in the Revolution of February sacrificed in order to get there and to cross with the people to this dream. The dreams of people can never die, and the revolutions of the people can never be forgotten, and the sacrifices of the people can never be forgotten. In conclusion, I would like to thank the guests who came from outside Turkey, as well as those who came from within Turkey, every single one of them, especially Dr. Ahmed Tama, the Prime Minister of the interim Syrian government and a member of the Negotiations Commission. I hope Syria will be independent and free. A victory for Syria, victory for Yemen, and for all the countries of the Arab Spring, as well as I would like to welcome the parliamentary members from Turkey, the deputy head of the AK party, and the head of the Foreign Relations Committee within the AK party, and every single one of you with your positions. And I don't want to forget to thank and express my gratitude to the leadership of Tawakkol Kerman Foundation, the manager Misk Al Junaid and her team. Thank you very much all, and peace be upon you.